to that. So let me introduce Susan again. She's the Director of Innovation, Emerging Science and Technology at the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. She's got many years of experience writing and implementing grants and contracts awarded by governments and private sources. I'd probably safe to say she's probably obtained millions of dollars worth of grants over her tenure. So I think she's a good person to talk about this topic. It's also timely. I know we've been talking while we're waiting this to load up and everybody joins. There's been a lot of grants coming up lately, and we've been seeing them getting posted. So keep your eyes out. I think this is a timely talk. She's going to go over features of grants, how they're awarded, the anatomy of proposals and such. But before she gets started, I just wanted to thank Terry Olson, who put together the MIT group, and the 9 supporting organizations that have contributed this past year. And that's AAPG, which is who's hosting this today, RMAG, Denver Well Logging Society, Darrell, Denver's Resource Library, DIPS, the International Petroleum Society of Denver, SPE Denver, WOGA, Women's Oil and Gas Association, and Women's Energy Network. So I'd like to thanks to all those folks who and their organizations have contributed. And with that, Susan, I'd like to get you started, and just folks to let you know, if you have any questions, we're going to save them to the end, and you can put them in the chat anytime, but we'll address them at the end to make sure Susan can get through the talk, and we will address any questions at the very end. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Nate. I'm really happy to be here. It's really an honor. And I again want to thank, I want to thank Kathy and Terry as well. This has been an amazing team effort. And I'm just so impressed with the number of people who've been involved in this initiative from the very beginning. So we have 77 people who signed up for this conference today. I know quite a few people aren't actually able to attend in person, but I don't think that matters too much, because I'll be making this recording available, and also I will send the PDF to RMAG or to Kathy and to Terry so that they can post it if they'd like to make it available. So basically the topic is grant writing for geoscientists, but it's actually broader than that, because we're not really talking only about grants. We're talking about funding opportunities. So many times those come in the form of contracts. So I would say that almost the bigger types of products or funding opportunities generally will come with as a contract rather than as a grant, and the contract is usually part of a larger initiative with an organization. So essentially, who gives out grants in these types of contracts, these funding, who issues requests for proposals, the famous RFPs? That they tend to be from mission-driven organizations. So they can be mission-driven organizations like foundations. The AAPG Foundation gives out many grants every year in the form of scholarships and also different types of initiatives. Anything that fits their mission. Also, you have grants from other larger associations that are in general, and then grants from a number of different places, but we'll go into in more depth. And when do we get a proliferation of grants and contracts? Contracts usually come out in RFPs when the organization wants to get its mission done, wants to make some progress on its path from point A to B. So it happens in times of transition. And as Nate was pointing out, right now, there are so many grant opportunities and contracts for critical minerals, for geothermal, for carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS, and all different types of things that have to do with the environment and the energy transition. There are also many times there are grants and contracts when there are times of new technology, especially when it has to do with technology with the public good or the collective good. Also, when there's support for change in society. So then we have the people that and organizations that give grants and contracts, not for profits, lots of government sources, governments, state level, federal level, and even on the level of other countries, and transnational agencies like World Bank. So let's look at grants for individuals. Grants for individuals can come in the form of state grants, and they could be from the state of Oklahoma, state of Texas, state of Colorado, private grants that are coming from grant-making organizations, institutional awards, which would be grants that would be to individuals within an institution, career development awards, and research grants. So I think that it's possible that many people here would be interested in the research grants, but they might also be interested in institutional awards to help your fledgling startup or the company that you're working with. So let's look at grant categories of grants to organizations. So we have program or project grants, repeated twice, sorry about that. There are, so that the grants or contracts would go to supporting specific programs. It could be an ongoing program, or it could be an ad hoc program or project. It could be an ad hoc project. General operating grants, those tend to be, one could say that they are more unusual, but then they could say no, especially if there's a relationship between, say, the foundation and a couple of specific organizations. So, for example, the American Geological Union or an American Geological Institute, they get grants from all kinds of organizations every year just for their operating costs to accomplish their mission. Capital grants tend to be for buildings, etc. Capacity building can be programmatic capacity building. So it can be a grant to, for example, a university to launch a lab or a program in, say, geothermal. And then also there are endowments often used for ongoing expenses or emerging needs. We often see faculty chairs as being endowed. So who receives grants? We have grants from individuals. And so individuals can receive scholarships, but also travel grants. So for example, if you need to travel to a conference, you can often apply for a grant. Work for grant makers, mission and vision, community, group team members, research funding, publication. And keep in mind that organizations often need not-for-profit status, which would be 501c3 and a DUNS number. And the DUNS number is Dun & Bradstreet number, which is a digitally assigned number. And then you need, they're used for mission achievement and support for people, equipment, travel, publication. Okay, so there are two different kinds of proposals for project funding and also for grants. Some are solicited, and they are listed on the website. They have clear requirements and format, strict deadline, and they're competitive. Unsolicited are also a potential. And some organizations welcome unsolicited proposals, but don't just send a big proposal. It's usually a two-stage process. Start with an inquiry letter, and the follow-up is positive with a more detailed proposal. We'll get through all this prefatory stuff to get right to how we go about writing. But let's think about the unsolicited proposals and grant applications. So some of the work that I've done with grants and contracts were with USAID, and that's now part of the State Department. And it was for economic development, and they often include resources management, like water, for example, and also business processes in energy and resources sector. And I looked to see if there are some unsolicited proposals right now in grant applications. I put a link here, but the answer is yes. And right now, there are quite a few in Africa for having to do with sort of changing policies and improving management of resources companies. So put some common elements in funding proposals. So we'll just talk about those. So first of all, you'll have your title page and cover letter. And you think, okay, this seems obvious. You'd be amazed how many times people forget these things. And just as a bit of background, Nate's right, I've written a lot of proposals. I've been in proposal writing teams, and also with my background in writing and technical writing, I've been involved in getting recruited into writing a lot of the narratives, which is somebody is, wow, that's horrible, but it isn't really that bad. It's actually can be quite fun. So you need the name and the contact information. And if there's a PI or principal investigator, be sure to specify it and the institutional affiliation. And then have a cover letter. Cover letter is important. You want to make sure that you include an overview and how your proposal aligns with the funding organization's goals and previous funding support. So what this suggests is that obviously, if you're going to have a cover letter, this cover letter actually could be your first inquiry letter. But be sure to talk about things about that specific organization. Make it clear that you've done your homework. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Wonder why my... Okay, strange. Moving quickly. Common elements in funding proposals. Oops. Oh, backwards, sorry about that. Okay, so the first part is the introduction, abstract or executive summary. Now, you will be sure to write this last, but it will include a brief overview of the proposal with information about the objective, the need, alignment. I'm just going to highlight this. Okay, so we have objective, the need, alignment with the mission of the funding organization, and then put down the impact in the profession, science, or community targeted in the proposal. Impact could be the number of people reached, the amount of the number of activities that you do, essentially what you plan to have. And then the researcher's experience in this topic and institutional track record. And these are all very important. One thing you'll find is that there's a lot of synchronicity and a lot of people are thinking about the same thing at the same time. So I can guarantee you that a lot of people are thinking about, for example, rare earths and critical minerals at this specific point in time. And so as a grant making organization, you might see 20 of like essentially the same concept. And like, how do you decide who's going to actually get that? And so this is why your abstract or executive summary has to be good, but we also need to write it last and also do some research to see what other people are doing. So I'll give you an example of a live situation. There are a number of initiatives right now in geothermal that have to do with updating geothermal heat maps or converting oil wells into geothermal wells. And then the idea is, okay, where do we put this together? And I've been in conversations about specifically this for several years, actually. And they all seem to come from early work that was done. So I don't know if you know John Holbrook at TCU. He had an NSF grant that was called SETI, and so it was looking at sedimentary basins and the sedimentary flow or the heat flow. And so basically, he wanted to expand that and has proposed expanding it and expanding his initial work to put together the heat flow map and then map it to sedimentary layers to be able to determine which wells would be best for converting into geothermal. And coincidentally, the same project has been done in Southeast Asia by Herman Darman in Indonesia. And so what's so fascinating is that here people are having the same idea, but they also have the same impediments. And so this is where you've got to figure out how to kind of break away from your competition. That everybody's going to have the same impediments in terms of not being able to, they're not going to be able to get the data, not going to be able to process the data, they're not going to be able to reality check the data. They may not have the actual team members with the right kind of background. So all of those things will give you competitive advantage. So in your personal background, and let's use the case of geothermal, you would need to say, okay, this institution, we have many years of examples. Like, let's just use the example of SMU. Maria Richards works at SMU, and she's been involved in working on a black well. It's like a geothermal heat map. And so she's like basically in the flagship organization for geothermal. So putting that down, and then also if you are in a organization that has like critical minerals. So let's say that you're not. Let's say that you are an individual, you're interested in this, and you want to get some funding. You definitely need to start building up some credibility. So I would recommend, for example, in the case of this biographical sketch, and if you're doing geothermal, put together at the very minimum a geothermal annotated bibliography of the topic and start doing research in your university's library, online library, or go to places like Wiley or Science Direct. You can access those and open journals. Sometimes you can only get the abstract without having to pay, but at least you can start putting together a robust geothermal, and then you can write annotations, and then go ahead and publish that. Either publish it in a journal, but I would recommend publishing it on your blog or in a LinkedIn post, because the interesting thing is things that are public tend to be, and publicly available, tend to be the most influential. If we ever doubt that, just look at misinformation and fake news. So start building up your credibility instantly, and don't wait, and just don't wait till something else. Till either that, if you just can't do that, plus partner with an organization that does have it. Now, in your problem statement or needs assessment, it documents the problems or need with relevant and current statistics, a clear link to funding sources, goals, and priorities. So how can the proposed activity or research affect the outcome? A clear needs statement. Why is this needed and why now? And what's the desired outcome? And then how will the success be measured or determined? This is just a very big overview, but here you need to establish the urgency of it and why you and why now. We can, in the case of geothermal, one could argue, well, Earth has been warm for a long time. Why now? And so anyway, you propose goals and objectives. So you need to identify your anticipated outcomes and benefits in measurable terms. So everybody knows what a SMART goal is, right? So it's measurable. It's one of the key things about a SMART goal. So it's specific, it's measurable. And how is the situation expected to change as a result of your funded program? What will the follow-on activities be if you are successful? Who will be positively impacted? And again, why should the proposal be funded now? So then there's the methods and implementation plan. Describes the activities that directly support the achievement of the objectives. So you want to include a timeline, need to name your team members, have a brief a description of what each person does. And then also, if you're going to have your organization do any cost share or in-kind contributions, be sure to include that. Okay, and then an evaluation plan, which ties in with your goals. So make sure that you assure satisfactory progress, identify potential problem areas, and describe the outcomes-based summative evaluation strategy. So use Bloom's taxonomy. So this is incredibly important. So what I'm saying, in Bloom's taxonomy, you want to organize your outcomes in from complicated, or from less complicated to more complex. So your first goals will be to like identify, define, not repeat. Well, these are for Bloom's taxonomy is often used for cognitive. But what you would do is to identify the different aspects of it, and then say this is part of our outcomes. Then you classify and organize and this is really important when you have a data analysis aspect. So you want to be able, part of your outcomes would be to gather information, identify the information you need to gather, organize it, classify it, and then interpret it, and then finally draw connections and evaluate, and then finally create a plan, a further plan. So there should be always in that sequence, from less complicated to more complicated. But you'd be amazed how many people start out, I'm going to create a thing, and then you can't really measure it because you haven't been able to establish the integrity of those component pieces. So also include future funding, sustainability, and follow-ons. Just include a description of how the project, if viewed as ongoing, will be funded, and sustainability strategy. So for example, in the case of geothermal, if the idea, for example, is in the project in Southeast Asia, is to continue to like sell the maps and to expand it, and they could also say, well, we plan to have a consulting, low-cost consulting company that will help people work on getting these together. And then, and to use them and implement them to convert oil and gas wells into geothermal wells. Then explain how the work that's being done is mission critical in a larger mission, and what is the ultimate impact. I heard one project today, it was a geothermal, but the idea was to have maps for all the major urban centers of the world and to convert them to oil and gas or to geothermal, and have this massive impact on and provide more energy for all the major population centers of the world. It's quite ambitious. And so one of the first steps would be to identify which cities actually can do that, which ones actually have the kind of heat flow gradient that would make that possible. And they have the elements. So it's not just heat flow, it's also the availability of water to flow through it, etc. Have budget, identify the costs being met by the funding source and the methods used to determine costs. So include in your budget personnel, equipment, travel, publications, materials, conference or open publication fees, page fees can be expensive, and include all matching or in-kind contributions and any other funding sources if applicable. Okay, you may be wondering what a DUNS number is. If you are working with an organization or if you have a startup, you need to get a DUNS number, Data Universal Numbering System, and it's administered by Dun & Bradstreet, and it's free. Just need to go ahead and and sign up for it. And then also the other components would be letters of support, personnel resumes of people on your team, proof of 501c3, which would be part of your certifications for the reps and certs, your DUNS number, and any kind of insurance and all sorts of things that you need to have. Sometimes you need to have like your letter of incorporation, articles of incorporation, the good standings certificate from the state and things like that. Now here's some grant proposal writing tips. So first of all, do audience analysis. So get to know your audience, read the proposal carefully, but also get to know who will be reading this. So investigate the organization, and there usually will be a couple of contact names. Try to get and connect with them in LinkedIn and get to know them. And it's fine to correspond with them. Think of Lloyd Bitzer in the rhetorical situation. Lloyd Bitzer was this famous rhetorician who wrote a wonderful article called The Rhetorical Situation that talks about how the situation is you'll use rhetoric to persuade. You have to need to identify what exactly are the things that you can influence and focus your argument there. Visualize the reader and also speak your audience's language. Use technical terminology and the appropriate technical terminology. Show, don't tell. So use graphs, etc. Now there will be a formula or a template. So follow the template or models very carefully. What's the overall problem, the magnitude of the problem, what new information or technology can be used to overcome the roadblocks, team members' credentials, what's the track record, how much will it cost? Those are things we talked about. Make sure the presentation is clear. You'd be amazed how many times people write a presentation and it's just so boring. You think, doesn't matter. I'm following the information. If you find yourself getting lost or bored or frustrated while you're reading your own, step back and say, okay, am I using subheadings? Are my paragraphs brief? Am I using bullet lists? Be sure to use bullet lists when you can, call outs, and use figures, charts, and maps when they're useful. But don't use so many that they're a distraction. So let's think of the elements of Aristotle's rhetoric. And what are the three ways that you persuade your reader? First is logos, through the facts. Then is ethos, which is through your credibility and your sense of your reputation. And then finally is pathos, which is emotions. And pathos is so powerful that it actually will override, if you're not careful, the rational part. So what you don't want to do is make somebody angry because they will be persuaded not to fund you. and so how do you engage in a technical presentation or through pathos? Well, first of all, you spark the curiosity, you make them interested, and you use a personal connection to shared experiences. So put down the experiences that you've had. They aren't things like, oh, well, I was looking through, if it's geothermal, you could say something that has to do with some of the experiences that you've had, even in researching. Some of the challenges in geothermal research, et cetera. But you don't need to do something like, oh, I went to Yellowstone and looked at the thermal hot springs that some tourists slipped into and dogs fall into and get boiled alive. You don't need to do that. Yes, that's curious. And the Yellowstone hot springs are beautiful. I actually haven't visited in person, but I want to, but they're deadly. So put together shared experiences, use concrete examples, and lead with a need, create a sense of importance, even urgency, and then keep the narrative moving, good narrative pacing. We talked again about persuasive edit. Again, I'll just go through this. Follow the template, make it professional, make sure it's readable, proofread. You get a second set of eyes to proofread. Use the correct style for citations and references, really critical. Look to see if they're using their own style or citation style, in-text citations, use them. If they're using APA or something like that, do it. Avoid footnotes unless they're specifically required by the proposal. Footnotes are antiquated. And got some examples. I can go to them now, but I think what I'll do is just go to those last because I want to talk about getting started. So I say let's use the noodling approach. How many of you have noodled? If you have, in the chat, put up a thumb or put a thumbs up in your and how many of you know what noodling is? So I don't see any thumbs up. Well, good for you for being cautious. Noodling is Nate knows what it is. Hey, noodling is something that it's fishing, hand fishing or arm fishing. So usually it's for catfish. And so notice that the noodler has gloves and she's going into where she thinks she's going to find a big catfish and she grabs it. But unfortunately, sometimes it can be a gar or a snake or even an alligator. So it's not without its risk. So what I would recommend is, but I like the idea, but I'm not recommending noodling in a pond. I'm recommending noodling in terms of just find the deep waters, find where there are going to be some grants, put on your gloves, get wet, have courage, but don't take too many risks. So let's noodle right now. So I'm going to click on grants.gov. I'm going to click on let's search grants. And it says it's a security issue. Look for the app in Microsoft Store. Well, that's not going to work. Okay, let me just share a different way. Okay. I'm going to open my browser. Oops. And go back. Okay, so if you're online, you may want to do this also. Okay, so let's just go through. This, we'll go click. And sorry, I'm having to do it this way. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And you should be able to see this. So if you go to grants.gov into the share thing, you'll see that this is a grants is a US grants through the government. And this is sort of a meta. And so you have like grant opportunities, site content. So you click on site content, it will take you to tools and search tips. But if we go to like grant opportunities again, let's just put in geothermal just to see what we come up with. Okay, so let's click on go. And okay, so look at the posted date. Can you see, this might be tiny. Do I need to enlarge it at all? Is that better? Okay, I'm assuming it is. So notice you've got close date, solicitation, new program areas, your renewable energy. So all of these different ones. And so you can click on any of them. And it's like the renewable energy systems REAP, that's rural. Okay, so let's go back and let's look at critical minerals. None. Okay. Oh no, here we have. Okay, so let's just for the fun of it, let's look at well, this is really broad. So cooperative agreement. where do you see cooperative agreement? Anyway, so notice you have global forestry biodiversity, instrument type cooperative agreement. Oh, the cooperative agreement is between agencies. So it means that there's one agency that's actually administering it, but it's funded through multiple. And let's just say cooperative agreement, this is through different organizations like USAID, social support. So it'll be an agreement with USAID, other agencies, usually administered through what they call a Beltway Bandit. It might be ACDI VOCA, it's probably in this case. That is a Washington-based organization. So they will get the bigger mega contract, which will be $100 million or something. And then they break it up into country-specific tasks. And then you as an individual or administrator can compete for some of those subtasks. So that's one of the things I did at the University of Oklahoma. It worked out quite well. It was a lot of work. They always sound like you're going to get a lot of money for what you do, and you do, but you certainly have to work for it. Okay, so procurement contracts. So we have different things. Keep in mind, in procurement contract, you have to go through registering first and getting qualified. In a grant, you also need to register first and get qualified to be able to apply before you do some of these things. So anyway, all these different kinds of categories that you can sift through. Now let's just look at some of the granting organizations. So if we look at, let's just look at energy and see what we come up with. Okay, so energy, we have 265 matching results. Not all of them are going to be useful, and some of them are notice of intent to issue. So we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but university training and research for fossil energy and carbon management. Okay, so look at these different agencies. So USAID, AmeriCorps, Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, you may want to just focus on Department of Energy and the Department of Office of Science, and just look at those to narrow it down. And then some of these are just notices of intent to issue. So those issues are not even there yet. But let's say that there's something, let's see what's something that's current. Harnessing emissions into structures, taking inputs from the atmosphere, Hestia. Well, ARPA, not surprising. It sounds complicated. Now, notice you don't have a click thing that says you can apply. It's not red. So it was posted in November. Do we see the original closing date for applications? It's December 2021. Then you scroll down, you get a lot of information. Where's the most critical information? It's right here. Before you even get into any of it, contact the person, the contact, and click to email and contact them to see if you even have a chance. Because sometimes grants are just not going to be at all possible. I would think that this would be probably only maybe 1 or 2 institutions in the world would be able to do this. So it's good to find out what you can do and what you can't. Okay, so let's go back to presentation and let's look at other things. So I want to have time for so let's stop sharing and we'll share again. I want to go over other places you can look for. Go Noodling for money. Share. And this does work, by the way, this approach. Okay, so another source of funding are not-for-profits, and you can go to GuideStar or CausIQ, all these different organizations that will let you just sift through organizations and find out where there's a good match for what you want to do. And the reason that you would want to do this, it may take you a long time, and you don't want to fish too long because you'll find out hours have passed. But sometimes you will really need to partner with an organization that has a 501c3, might be a university. If you want to do that, you would go to a professor and say, okay, I have this proposal and I'd like to get funding, and they have the infrastructure to help you. The downside is that they'll take overhead. So it'll take often up to 51%. So that means that the proposal has to be scaled appropriately, but they can help you do all the work of the reporting and all the things that need to be done precisely and exactly right in terms of the reporting and the accounting and receiving the funding, et cetera. So let's just go, for the fun of it, let's go to CausIQ. Okay, so there are all kinds of screen-based or web-based tools now. Some are free, some are not, that will help you find out where the not-for-profit and companies are. And also, I would recommend just going to some of the other places, but just find out where the locations are. So let's just say, just for the heck of it, that came up first, let's say Abilene, not-for-profits. And so notice how they have all sorts of kinds of information, but you can also sort by revenue, by keywords. So let's sort by, let's just say water. Let's say you want to help come up with new water. So these are not-for-profits. Oh, Living Water, Church of God. Well, at any rate, you can see how they have assets, employees, etc., and they can help you. Once you identify a funding source or an organization, you can go into it and research. You can also just go directly to their website. So you could go to places that you know give grants, but those are changing all the time. So sometimes it's good to go through, say, CausIQ. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Now, one thing that people wonder about all the time is whether or not it's possible to apply for funding all the time, or how strict are people with deadlines? They talk about getting funding for this or that. How quickly is it actually released? It's all part of a process. So I would say take some time if you want to get involved in something with energy. Go to the National Energy Technology Laboratory, NETL, here in the state of Washington, and go to their website and just look at the different announcements. And these are funding opportunity announcements. And here's the regular website for the entire website, but here's where you get funding announcements. So let's go to the funding announcement, and let's just take a look. So if you go to the funding announcement, you can do a search, and let's just do a search, let's say energy, and we'll do a search. And notice that funding opportunities are coming up, and you can click on each one. Energy storage for fossil energy systems. And then you've got program goals. And then if you continue to search, you'll find where they have announcements or upcoming announcements for funding. So again, you'll have announcement numbers, you'll have the announcement type, opening date, closing date. And so here they intend to issue a funding opportunity announcement. And so notice no applications will be accepted through this notice, and do not submit questions or respond to this notice of intent. It's just so that you can be aware, and so you can start putting your calendar like when to start searching for these, or you get on a list serve. And so they say go to Fed Connect. So here are additional information things. So keep in mind, you need to be a registered user. So if you're wanting to look for federal funding, one of the first things to do is to go ahead and become a registered member at Fed Connect, so you can actually get these upcoming funding opportunities and start assembling your team. Most of these are going to be for organizational grants or contracts, and not for individuals. So they're a lot more rigid. Anyway, so I have just, I think, one or two more slides, and we'll do questions. So let's see. So just here's an example of what you would see. Oops. That this is a funding announcement on front-end engineering design, feed studies of advanced direct air capture systems capable of removing a minimum of 5,000 tons per year CO2 from the air based on life cycle analysis. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Anyway, this is one example. So I just wanted to give you an example, a few minutes for questions. So anyway, thank you.
All right, thanks, Susan. That was a lot of information. We've got a few minutes to ask you questions. There was one on the chat box from Alan. I don't know your last name, but he asked what a cooperative agreement was. And so while you were talking, Susan, I looked it up. In a nutshell, a cooperative agreement funding instrument type is from an act in the 70s, where essentially it's where a federal agency awards a grant or money through a pass-through agency. So essentially, Department of Interior would give money to the USGS, and the USGS would then give the money to a research project somewhere. So that would be an example of a.
Okay, great. So that's great. That nails it. And then at the end where it's distributed, it's usually like, well, so-called Beltway Bandit, or the funded organization that implementing partner, put it that way.
Alan also has a question on how long does what are your thoughts on how long the application takes? I'm assuming not how long it takes to prepare one, but let's say they have a deadline. How long does it take from the deadline to when you be awarded?
It depends on what it is. So I remember years ago doing a CCUS. Well, actually, it was CCS back then. But it was just carbon capture, and there weren't too many people. It was for doing education for carbon capture. There were not too many organizations that were competing for it, so it did not take too long. But things can be slowed down. Things like government shutdowns, COVID, all those things have a way of dragging out the process. And also, if it's something that, if you are working with the implementing partner or the awardee of the umbrella contract, it can be pretty quick, because they want you to, that can be painfully and terrifyingly quick, because they want you to actually start implementing. So they'll come around and you'll get a decision within a couple of weeks, but they want you to implement like the next week, start implementing.
I've compiled a list of some of these grant websites that Susan put up in her presentation. I'm just gonna add these to the chat box real quick. It's kind of a compilation of what she had in their PowerPoint presentation. Another question was from Clinton Tippett. He asked, Susan, early in the talk, you mentioned building a bibliography. Is this something that you include in an application? Isn't it something that you do add a bibliography in your application? I think you were saying getting informed is what I believe.
Okay, there are two different ways to do it. One, to build up your credibility, you do an annotated bibliography, which would be like a little paragraph after each one, kind of history of the idea, and publish it out there, showing that you know what you're talking about. But then, depending on the proposal, then if it is a proposal to do like a scientific, say, a laboratory experiment to try new types of solvents or something with clean cores, like then you would definitely need to have the your evidence as published papers showing that your research design is good. You need to have bibliography that supports your A, research design, and B, the proof of the idea or concept, proof of concept, and then people having range of experiences with it.
Bonnie Elwood had a question about these different websites that you presented, grants.gov. You also presented FedConnect, the National Energy Technology Lab. Do you have a summary of what the differences are, the similarities, like what?
Well, so the meta ones like FedConnect will give you the more specific details about that, and you sometimes even have to submit through FedConnect. Grants.gov is just a place where it's a kind of a meta search that allows you to search the opportunities, and so you would go there to find out what they are, but you would not actually submit through grants.gov. In FedConnect, you would many times you do have to actually go through that portal, and those are federal level. Now, if you're looking at not-for-profit level, I say that one of the reasons to use one of the different kind of utility search engines is just so you can go through and sort, because it's so, and also find out, just this discovery process of what's actually out there. So for example, anything that has to do with the environment, you can think of the obvious places like Sierra Club or whatever, but then there are all different kinds of organizations that give grants that range from, say, Land O'Lakes. You would be surprised how many they put out about like helping develop better water sources. So those are ones that will help you with not-for-profits. And then other ones will help you find the transnational organizations like UN and World Bank, et cetera.
Well, as folks transition and they're are transitioning or have or looking to, looks like what Susan shared with us was a lot of the how-to when you find something, and then some good links to get started on where to look. It sounds like a person would spend a little bit more time going through grant application portals than on their social media, perhaps. It would be a time commitment if you were interested in looking for grants.
It can be a huge time sink, and Clinton has a good point. He said, I think your search criteria needs to be fine-tuned. For example, if you make it critical and minerals as opposed to critical minerals, I would say that in theory, in this case, yes, but if it's a term that people use, that's a scientific term like critical minerals, what you would need to do is what you've done, put quotation marks, but then take out the and. But if you want critical and minerals, then it would be anything that has the word critical and the word minerals in any of the areas that you're searching. Could be the description. But if you say critical minerals as a term, a proper term, then you would have the terms, the critical minerals would be together.
Well, folks, I think that's our end of our time commitment. If you guys have any more questions, you can reach out to Susan Nash directly. She had it on the slide on there. On her tail end of her slides deck, snash@aapg.org, and you can get a hold of her. But thanks for attending, and hope that helps some of you guys out in getting started in some of this grant stuff. So with that, I hope everybody has a good holiday season and stay safe.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and just want to express my appreciation to you, Nate, and also to Kathy and Terry and the RMAG and the members in transition, and connect within LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, folks, you can get this recording again on RMAG's website. It'll be posted in that link above that I saw earlier. And Merry Christmas to everybody else.